have some ability to shape the organization, influence who they work with and how they work with them. Interviewing ends up needing to take higher precedence than almost everything else you do. We were doing a lot of engineering hiring back in the March to early June kind of time frame this year. And there were a couple of weeks where I was doing 4 or 5 face-to-face interviews in a single week. And we spread that kind of load across all of the engineers. We had everybody participating. So that took precedence over a lot of other feature work that was on hold. But we took that hiring really seriously. We wanted to make sure we got the right people, that we shaped the company well, that we stayed within our idea of what our culture was and what our values were. So hiring is a thing that you have to approach holistically across your organization. You want to kind of think about all these factors and have a plan for all these factors. How do you market yourself? Where do you get your name out there? Are you going to user groups and conferences and things like that? Is there some other newspaper ads, other forums for ads? How do you get your name out there? How do you market yourself? What's the message in that marketing? Recruiters, are you working with internal on-staff recruiters, or are you outsourcing that and working with a recruiting firm? How do you make sure all those people are on message, and what should that message be? How are you going to do your interviewing process? Kind of all the stuff I'm going to talk about in most of the rest of this presentation. How do you structure it and all that kind of stuff. Salaries and negotiation. Obviously, you have to have a plan for what you can afford, but you also want to have a plan for what do you do. What are the points that you can negotiate? Do you have non-financial compensation that you can offer as part of that? Do you have trade-offs that you can make about signing bonuses or extra stock or things like that? How are you going to handle the whole process of offers, making offers, handling rejection? How do you make sure that you're on message with all of that? And you should think about that all the way through to onboarding. How do you get somebody in when they first get there? And for us, for onboarding, we like to get somebody within the first day, building code, hopefully even submitting a PR on their first day. So you have to think about that kind of stuff for your whole thing. So we kind of tailored our approach to a tight market. But I think that everything that you come to in a tight market where it's hard to find candidates, in the Denver market in particular, there's way more positions than there are candidates. You're trying to attract candidates away from other jobs that they're already in, trying to provide them an alternative. But so the things that you do to kind of attract that kind of market are also going to be things that, that serve you well in an easy market. You want to build your reputation. You want to get your name out there as a good place to work. You want to give people, when they come in and interview with you, a good taste. You know, leave them feeling good about your company. That serves you well, even when there's way more candidates knocking at the door than you have positions. So you want to pursue your candidates honestly, right? You don't want to be doing anything misleading. You don't want to be shifty. You don't want to any sort of bad taste that you leave with people is really detrimental. Ideally, you want to show them real problems. What's your company really work with? And you want to show them their real coworkers. I don't think it does a lot of good to have a small team of people that does all of the interviewing, and a candidate comes in, meets these people, does some canned quiz exercises that have nothing to do with the day-to-day work, and then never gets to work with those people that he or she interviewed with. You want to have them coming in and talking about things that are really related to what they're going to work on and how they're going to work on it. And you want to know, oh, I got along well with that guy in the interview. I'd really like to work with him, and know that that's going to happen. So you want to have respect and reputation both ways. And that leads directly into interviewing is a two-way street. You are trying to attract a candidate. The candidate should be evaluating you as much as you are evaluating that candidate. So you want to be giving a realistic picture of what the interactions are going to be like between you and that candidate when they hire on. You want to give them a good understanding of what your culture's like, and you want to assess whether their cultural, what they exhibit for culture kind of fits in with that, and what they're looking for culture fits in with that. You want to have some engagement with them. You want to communicate what your company's vision is, and you want them to have some buy-in to that, right? So if you're a company that that does marketing, you want to find somebody who's kind of interested in marketing. If you do smart energy, like we do smart energy, people who are interested in saving the environment and being energy efficient and things like that are going to buy into that vision. You want to understand what the candidate's career goals are and how you can help to meet those. What can you offer to them? And turnaround's really important too. So at Tendril, we try to have a 24-hour turnaround in all of our interactions. Somebody submits a resume, we try to give them some connection within 24 hours. When we do a phone screen, we want to get back to them within 24 hours. We do a face-to-face interview, we want to get back to them in 24 hours. And that's important to, like I said, respect and reputation, and make sure that you're respecting the candidate and you're respecting the candidate's time as well. So I think it's important. For everyone to have some idea of the rubric of how they're hiring. And in a really big organization, a huge organization, one of these aerospace firms or government consulting firms, you know, tens of thousands of employees, this may need to be a really complete form. For a small company, obviously that's not necessary to be that kind of firm. But once you're past, you know, 4 or 5 people working out of somebody's garage, you want to have some consistency in how you evaluate people. So our rubric for how we evaluate people is first, cultural fit. Obviously, do they meet our culture? Second, technical aptitude. Do they have the aptitude to be smart technical people who think in a technical way? And finally, technical fit. If you know our tools and technologies, fantastic. If you don't know our tools and technologies, we can teach you. So I'll explain all of these in a little more detail. Clearly, you want to be sure that you're finding people that you can work with. But more than just people that you can generally work with, you want to kind of know what they're about. And this is what Tendril's about. So when we talk about culture, kind of some of our main areas that we look for in culture are collaboration. We're highly collaborative at a very low grassroots level. I already mentioned PRs, so we use GitHub kind of thing, lots of code review on each other's projects, lots of whiteboarding, lots of standing table in the kitchen. I've got a problem, I'm thinking about this, do you have any ideas how you can help me? Influence, so again, from a really grassroots level, we have an engineering-driven culture. We don't have an architecture team or an engineering management team that says this project's going to be implemented with Spark and Kinesis and it's going to be done this way and go off and do it, no questions. We have that driven by the engineers. So we want to have engineers who are able to kind of come up with their own ideas and help to build consensus with one another. Communication is obviously hugely important when I talk about those first two. If you can't communicate those ideas, you can't influence those ideas, you can't collaborate effectively. Pragmatism is interesting. Pragmatism cuts both ways, right? If you've got an ooh shiny, you have to have a pragmatic approach to say, I've spent too much time on the ooh shiny and it's not helping me get anywhere. But the other side of that is sometimes you want to go look at ooh shinies because that will be the quicker, better way to implement the thing. These new technologies are coming out all the time. They've got new strengths and new weaknesses. And there's a reason why that new technology came along. Maybe it really is the most effective thing for us to do now, and the pragmatic thing is for us to try to demonstrate to it. Enthusiasm is important in everything, right? We want to have people who care about what they're doing, who are excited about what they're doing, and communicate that to one another and influence one another in that way. And introspection. Sometimes we do this in like formal retrospectives. Many times we do this in completely informal, talking at the bar on Friday afternoon after work. What did we do this week? Why did it work well? What problem did we run into? Would we have done it the same way if we had to do it again? So there's a lot of humility and lack of ego that come into all of this, and communicating with your peers and so on. In terms of technical aptitude, a bunch of the characteristics that we really value in technical aptitude are clear and focused thinking first and foremost, right? I find it very interesting when I interview a bunch of different candidates and get a bunch of different ways to think about problems, but we want to have those candidates be able to think through the problem and not candidates who get wrapped around an axle or jump from any idea to any idea without ever really being able to complete one. Obviously, communication there is very important, and being able to communicate what that thinking was and tell us, here's how I'm approaching this problem and how I work with it. Because when you get down to a day-to-day thing, right, again, it doesn't come out and just I walk over and say, this is how we're going to implement this thing, right? I want to be able to kind of communicate. This is how I was thinking we'd approach this. And if we do that in a fine-grained way, then you can start to add to pieces. Maybe I'm missing something or a part of it can be made better. It's important to ask questions, but it's also important to make assumptions. Sometimes you just won't get the answer or won't be able to get the absolute answer. So sometimes you have to say, okay, well, I'm going to assume that it's going to work like this, and what does that mean when I think through the ramifications of that? And we can come back and revisit that later, if we're having an agile kind of approach and iteratively building a thing. Curiosity is obviously hugely important to technical aptitude. Curiosity about the ecosystem you're working in, the different technologies that are available to you. Bringing breadth of experience, you've seen a bunch of different things, you've learned a lot of different lessons, you can bring that to bear. And kind of curiosity and breadth of experience and enthusiasm kind of all drive towards an ability to learn. At Tendril in particular, we like to be fairly far onto the cutting edge of technology and data science as we approach what we're trying to do in the smart energy sphere. So being able to learn new things, learn new technologies, learn new scientific techniques that are appropriate to what we do is really important. In terms of technical fit, again, this is our least important area that we consider. This is where someone who has less current technical fit but is a perfect cultural fit, we're likely going to move on that candidate, make them an offer. But it's nice when a candidate has wide ecosystem familiarity. We're definitely looking for candidates who have experience building some similar systems, right? We want to take lessons that they've learned and be able to apply them to our problems. Techniques that you've learned along the way. How do you think about problems? How do you design a thing? How do you test a thing? How do you debug a thing? How do you do performance testing on a thing? All that kind of stuff is important to bring to the table as well, even when you move into a new domain, new language. Scale and performance, again, that's bringing lessons from what you've done in the past. And languages, tools, and frameworks are by far the least important thing. We do like to get, and have done in the past, like to get candidates who are just starting to move from one language ecosystem to another language ecosystem. And it really brings an interesting thing. Different languages kind of have different cultures around their language. So it's a really interesting thing when you bring a Ruby developer into a Java shop, or you move those guys into Scala and see what they bring that's different. So let's talk about the nitty-gritty of doing an actual interview. So we have kind of three usual stages that we do. Most of the time we do the first two, a phone screen and a face-to-face interview. Pairing interview we'll do sometimes when there's some extra piece of information that we're trying to get that we don't feel like we answered sufficiently in the first two. And rather than that just being a repeat of the face-to-face with different people on the interviewing panel, we try to approach that one a little bit differently, and so that's why that's a pairing interview. So our phone screen, I'm going to talk in a second about how we evolved this. But we like this phone screen to be a conversation, not a checklist. I'd rather get on the phone with somebody and just kind of talk about what have you been working on, what are you interested in, what are you about, what are you looking for, then go through a list of questions that's what's the difference between an interface and an abstract-based class? What's the difference between inheritance and polymorphism, whatever. Ideally, we'd like to try to get the first cultural assessment and the first aptitude assessment out of the phone screen. And that's kind of hard to do, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. That's kind of harder to do than going down a checklist question and saying, I know that this guy technically knows about Java, but instead trying to assess, does this guy have the interesting personality that's going to work for us? Are they all those values that I had before? Are they enthusiastic? Are they curious and interested to learn? We've kind of had some back and forth on phone, whether these should be done by phone or by video. We've done them a few times on Google Hangouts. That seems to work pretty well as the person giving the phone screen from Tendril's perspective. There's something a little weird about that. I'm not completely comfortable with that, but I'm not completely uncomfortable with it either. And I can't really put a finger on any one thing that was good or bad about that. So we've been letting that be driven a lot by what the candidate prefers. It seems like candidates that are accustomed to working from home usually prefer to do the video, and candidates that are accustomed to working in an office environment usually prefer the phone. But it's kind of an interesting thing to think about. So we've kind of evolved these over the last year and a half, and we started with much more of an objective list of questions. And the nice thing about an objective list of questions, right, is you can hand them out to all your engineers, you put it on a wiki page or whatever, and everybody knows if I get asked to do a phone screen, I can just pull up that wiki page and I can go through the questions and I know what to ask them. But it only gets you that one kind of technical fit kind of answer, and it doesn't kind of let the conversation flow and assess more of the cultural and aptitude kind of things. So we've kind of shifted more to a subjective and cultural. And that kind of means that we have to take engineers that haven't done phone screens, that we're getting ready to prep them to do a phone screen, and have them sit in on a couple and listen in and kind of see how the flow is and let them observe a couple of different people giving them and things like that, and kind of see what works and what doesn't work. But I think it gives us a much better way to assess the candidate's cultural and aptitude fits and kind of communicate a little better what we're about in those areas as well. So there's a definite change in topics as our needs change. At some points, we are really hurting for scalability experience, so we'll ask a lot more scalability questions. At other points, maybe we're looking for somebody who has more database stuff because we're having a lot of database problems. We need to build expertise on our team for that. So those kinds of things will change the topics a little bit as our needs change, what the current staffing looks like right now. But typically the other kind of topics that we'll cover are things around what the candidate's been working on, what they're interested in, what their kind of knowledge of scalability is, what their knowledge of performance is, what's their thoughts on testing, what have they done with deployments, and things like that. Did you have a question? Interesting. Interesting. So I don't know of those sites. I am not at all surprised that such sites exist. I know that there is plenty of sites on things related to Glassdoor and other sites that do share what some of the interview material is. I'm not familiar with specific ones. That's a good point, and I think this is someplace where by being more subjective and having this more as a conversation and less as a checklist, you avoid that problem. So I got a phone call maybe a month ago from a recruiter that I worked with in the past, and after exchanging regular pleasantries, he said, "I just found out that you're going to be phone screening one of my candidates tomorrow. I was wondering if you can give me any information what he should prepare for." And it was super nice to be able to say, actually, we're just going to have a conversation about what he's been working on, what he's interested in, and things like that. There really isn't any preparation. If he's been doing the work that he claims to be doing, he should be able to talk about it. We'll have a conversation. It'll be good. So I've kind of alluded to a few of these things. These are some of the kind of specific things that we like to ask and just talk about from there. What have you been working on? What'd you do on that project? What technology did you use? Why did you guys make those choices? What did you learn out of that? What would you do differently if you had to do that project again? Would you use that same technology again? Would you use it, but you have some gotchas that you're aware of now? How do you stay up to date on stuff? It's always kind of a red flag when you talk to a candidate and you can kind of tell that they're stuck in a rut, and they know that they're stuck in a rut. But then when you ask, how do you stay up to date? Well, I really don't do anything. Like, I'm sorry, I can't help you get out of your rut. So once we've done a phone screen, we've made a decision whether or not to bring this person in for a face-to-face. Almost entirely that decision is made by that first person on that first phone screen. Every once in a while you'll kind of have a maybe, and so we have had a few times our engineering manager call and do a similar conversation just as a second opinion. But once we've made that decision to bring a person in for a face-to-face, again, we're trying to make that decision within 24 hours and get back to the candidate and get something scheduled. We're going to bring them in for a face-to-face, and our face-to-face has a couple of different parts. One big part is a coding and collaborating exercise, and I'll talk about this more on subsequent slides. But actually trying to look at some actual code and talk about actual code. We have a design exercise, much more of a whiteboard exercise, kind of typical to what you may have seen in other places, but appropriate to the kind of work we do. We definitely like to spend time giving the candidate an overview of what we do and what we're looking for in a specific technical sense. This is the work that we have over the next 6 to 12 months and the kinds of things we need somebody to do and to work on. And we really, really try to avoid brain teasers and trivia and grilling. Because when you come to work every day, our company's job is not to do trivia or brain teasers. If your company's job is to move mountains, then how do you move Mount Fuji is an appropriate interview question. If your company's job is to build websites, how do you move Mount Fuji is bullshit. So one last thing on that topic, right? If your company really does need excellent computer scientists to do very hard computer science problems, like a Google or a Facebook at huge scale, and you really need to know how to search a set in the most effective way, then it's appropriate to have a hardcore algorithm question. If, again, you're building websites, you probably want to ask questions that are more about building websites. So there's a few trade-offs that you have as you do this kind of thing. So this kind of relates to some of the comments that we had before. How much do you kind of standardize on a set of questions or standardize on the same exercise, whether it's the design exercise or the coding exercise? And how much do you let that be just completely different and completely shaped by each candidate? And I think you want to be somewhere in the middle, right? So if you have kind of a standardized approach, particularly with a design or a coding exercise, once you've given it to a handful of candidates, now you start to see several common ways to approach the problem. Kind of gives you an idea, where's the candidate going? What are the complications or pitfalls that the candidate's likely to run into? And that's really useful. Organically, it's always super fun when you bring a candidate in and they take the exercise in a way that you've never thought of before. And you can just follow on from that +1, +1, +1. You get to really interesting places, and then sometimes that turns into new complication questions you can ask other candidates. You want that to be apropos to how you work. Again, my comments about Mount Fuji and about algorithms. The more that you can kind of show what it's like to work with you and to work with for you to work with the candidate in a way that matches what the day-to-day work is, better. And there's always a trade-off about how far you drill in. Whether it's a candidate who's really doing well or a candidate that's struggling on questions, you have to feel out how much am I going to keep asking questions. Am I going to keep asking until they break, or am I going to be easy on them too soon? Any of you guys who've done interviews before, I'm sure you've had questions where the candidate does really well at a surface level, and then if you dig into that, there's gaps or there's uncertainties, and you just have to kind of feel out as you have this organic kind of discussion, what's the right level to take that. You want to know that the candidate knows what they're talking about, but you don't want to be mean. So our coding exercise, again, is a collaborative exercise. It's looking at and talking about actual code. And we want that to look kind of like day-to-day work. So I'm not going to show you an example of our actual product, or our actual, the couple of exercises that we do. I'll describe them a little more on next slides. But we want to have a real piece of code that's really written in the language we use, primarily Java, but for web devs, we'll try to do this as a Java or a JavaScript exercise or a Ruby exercise. We want that to be kind of code review, test driving, interaction with one another. The same way that we would do that on a day-to-day basis. You're going to submit your work in a PR, and I'm going to be looking at it. I want this to be a similar experience to what that's going to be when you're working for us and really submitting a PR, and we're really talking about your code. And by making this about actual code and what the day-to-day work is really like, we're getting a feeling of what the candidate, how the candidate is comfortable in those situations, and we're giving them a feel for how we work on those kinds of things. So our Java example exercise, we start with a basic working class that has no tests. And there's some gotchas there. So maybe we have problems with return types, or we have problems with visibility of a method, or things like that. And our task is to write tests to test drive, basically to write tests around that class. And writing tests around that class, we're going to have to test drive changes to the class under test in order to make it more testable. And as I put it up there, that sounds really surface level, but the pitfalls that are involved really make it interesting. Once you run into a pitfall and say, oh, this thing doesn't return anything, now you can have a really rich conversation about what should it return? Why should it return that? What's better for this case? How about we try this part now and we can iterate on it? All those kinds of rich interactions that you can have come out really nicely. For a web developer, we've done several similar things. As I've mentioned, sometimes those will be in JavaScript or in Ruby, kind of depending, again, what we're looking for and what the candidate's bringing to the table. We've done a lot of HTML, CSS, JavaScript kind of interactively build a thing, almost more a pair programming kind of exercise. But again, like let's build this thing interactively and see what problems we run into, and work through them in a way similar to the way that we would work through them if we were running into this problem for real at work. So obviously we're going to throw in some other questions in the interview. We're going to spend some time maybe at the beginning and maybe between these just talking about your background, talking about what's your experience with Agile or with testing or whatever. And, if nothing else, we like to do those in between just to kind of give you a chance to decompress. And we just spent 40 minutes pretty involved in code. Let's answer some easy questions about other things before we come back to a design exercise and start thinking hard again. But then we'll pick up a design exercise. We like this design exercise to be domain relevant. So we're in the smart energy space. We work with solar devices. We do, or have done in the past, work with thermostats and things like that. So we like, even if this is a very surface level design exercise and not realistic to actual products, actual APIs of, say, a Nest thermostat, we still like for this to be domain relevant. We like to have a design exercise talking about a thermostat. This gives you kind of a flavor of what we do, what the work is like, what, again, our vision's like, what kinds of, what's the domain feel like. this design exercise, we focus a lot on the interactions between different parts of the design, right? If we're talking about a thermostat, we want to talk a lot about how does that thermostat communicate to the cloud, communicate to a phone, communicate, to other controllers, things like that. And we love to throw in complications. It's really fun to come up with a design and then add something like, well, what if this interaction is slow? What if this is guaranteed to only happen once a day? Or things like that. How does that change your design? So finally, we'll have a pairing interview if there's some kind of question that we couldn't answer in the face-to-face. And typically, and I'll talk a little more about what we do after the interview, but if after the interview we kind of talk about it and we say, I thought this candidate was great, but I wasn't sure about how quickly that candidate would get up to speed on a new technology. Or I kind of felt something about they might be a little bit freaked by having a completely new tech stack in front of them. When we have those kind of questions that we can't directly answer, that's when we like to get a pairing interview and get a one-on-one with one of our engineers and that candidate to try to get an answer to that question. And it's important that we make this more real as we have more interactions. So we like to really do real code and real problems. We like to pull up our actual code base and work on a bug or work on a side tool that will help us with some gap that we have. For example, we have a CMS storing some content. We've run into problems if that content isn't formatted correctly, and we allow not external users, but we allow some of our business people and our accounts management people to modify that content through the CMS's interface. Run into problems with that not being formatted correctly. This is a great side tool that somebody could build in pairing exercise that's really appropriate to what we do. It's a real problem that we're really dealing with, and gets a chance for one of our engineers to sit down with that candidate and try to get that feel. And we kind of pick that bug or we pick that tool or that problem kind of based on what that question is we're trying to ask. So if we're trying to understand, this guy's got a really great extensive history of high performance Java, but he's never looked at Scala before, and it felt this little bit of hesitation when we did the face-to-face. Let's get him in for a pairing and dump him into one of our hairiest Scala code bases, and we'll see if he freaks out. So some of those have taken the form more of a code review kind of thing, and we'll just kind of go through the code at a really deep level and look for problems in it and help to just kind of walk through it. Other times we'll actually do ping pong pairing. Is everybody familiar with ping pong pairing? So ping pong pairing is where you've got the two people pairing and you take turns. One person will write the test and the other person will implement the test. And then you can either have the same person always writing the test and the same person always implementing the solution, or you can swap roles every time. But just a real back and forth formal pairing thing. Just as an aside, we don't religiously do any pair programming. We do it occasionally on specific problems as the need arises. So this is somewhere where on a pairing interview we're maybe a little bit more formal than we would be in the office. But ping pong pairing, I think we've tended to do more with less senior candidates, where we wanted to have just a little bit more structure in the pairing interview than something that's more like a code review kind of exercise, where very senior candidate, you expect them to be diving right in and giving you their ideas as you go. So again, we're trying to answer, what's working with this candidate like, and whatever the specific outstanding questions are that we were trying to answer. And again, with my theme of making this a two-way street, this should also be giving that candidate a chance to evaluate the person he's working with. Do I want to work with that guy? Is he a total jerk? Me, am I a total jerk? So after we do the interview, we try to do a meet after as soon as possible. So everybody that's been in the interview, we try to get together in the kitchen or in a meeting room, standing around the standing table, and talk about it. What'd you think and why? So again, really big companies, maybe they need to have a formal, recorded in a document somewhere, and that gets filed away in the HR database. But we think it's really important to, and we do use JobVite to keep kind of those records. But we do think it's really important to have that conversation and really talk about, these are the things I thought were strong about this candidate. These are the red flags or potential red flags that I saw. What'd you think about that? Did you think that was a weird answer, or just a different way of thinking about it than what we've talked about before? And we'd like for all of those engineers to make that recommendation there, right? We want every person who's involved to have a say into, yeah, I'd like to work with that candidate, or I've got an issue and we have to talk about that issue. So again, we're involving all the engineers that were involved in the interview. We do like to have all of our engineers participate in the hiring process at some point, and participate fairly early in their tenure at Tendril. So I was doing phone screens and face-to-face interviews within about 4 or 5 weeks of starting at Tendril. We've had a few of our engineers come in, and within 3 weeks we get them onto an interview helping other people. We think everybody should be playing a role in shaping the company and shaping the culture of the company. And just because you're new to the company, or regardless of your level of expertise, whether you're a junior guy or a very senior, crusty old salt, you should have some ability to have a say in what's the shape of the company look like, who do I want to work with. We try to have all opinions valued equally at that. It can be hard, particularly if you're a new guy, 3 weeks in and you're in an interview, and the VP of engineering says, I really like the candidate. Yeah, okay, candidate too. But we try to make sure that everybody has a say, and that it's clear to everybody that their say is important to that. Well, I'm 3 years out of school, and this is the first interview I've ever done, but I was really concerned by this answer that the candidate gave. It's super important. We do, however, try to calibrate expectations on an interview by having the people who haven't done interviews before in with some people who have done interviews before. So I think I may have been remiss in mentioning on the previous slide, typically we'll have 3, maybe 4 engineers in with the candidate for that coding exercise. So we try to have at least one person who's done a number of these in, and then hopefully a couple of new folks. And this was particularly interesting as we spun up our new office here in Denver. Hired a bunch of new engineers down here in Denver, and then we're trying, if you're going to be working out of our Denver office, we want to interview you in Denver. If you're going to be working out of our Boulder office, we want to interview you out of Boulder. We don't want to make you have to move. We'll send our engineers around if we need to make sure that somebody's there to do your interview. And that's exactly what we had to do. We had to bring somebody down from Boulder, and then a couple engineers from Denver, just so we could kind of get everybody calibrated and get everybody experience with how we run this. As we're making decisions about candidates, we do want to consider, opportunities for growth and what the potential of the candidate is. And I think that's kind of implicit in the fact that we take our technical fit as our least important thing. We can always teach you more, but we can't teach asshole. But if you have room to grow into places, are you really interested in an area and you're trying to work your way into that area? If you're exhibiting those other things, the curiosity, the ability to learn, the enthusiasm, the collaboration and ability to communicate your ideas, there's a lot of room for you to show us that you have potential to grow into being a truly top-notch engineer that we want to take a chance on. What does that candidate need to bloom, and can we supply those things? So we will often do a very small block of time with our HR staff. Then we'll have the engineers in with the candidate for about 2 hours, and we'll do all four, or 3 or 4 engineers and the candidate for about 2 hours. We'll go through the coding exercise, we'll go through the design exercise, have some more conversation as time allows, give the candidate some chance to ask questions and give them an overview of our architecture and our needs. Then we'll often have a chance for the candidate to meet with one of our engineering managers. Sometimes that's done over lunch if scheduling allows. So half-hour or hour block that they get to meet with an engineering manager. And then we usually give them a few minutes at the end to follow up with the HR. And so that gives us quite a good chance for us when we have that meet after to all be talking about the same conversation, right? I had the same conversation with that candidate. I heard the same thing you heard, and I interpreted it differently than you interpreted, or I heard the same thing that you heard, and yeah, I think you're right. That's a sketchy answer. It's a different part that's brought by the engineering manager, right? But the engineering manager's having a different level conversation, probably talking a lot more about Agile and testing and things like that, maybe talking a little bit at a high level of what you've done before and where are you trying to go. So we'll very often get an answer from the engineering manager that says, yeah, I like that candidate, but you guys really dug in on the technical things, so you guys will have to tell me whether technically the answers were good. So diversity, have to have a diversity slide. I don't really want to have too many comments here about gender or racial diversity. I think what's important at the rubber meets road is that we have a diversity of experience and thought and opinion. And gender and racial diversity is a great way to help get that. But what we want at a day-to-day basis, right, is to have different ideas to shape the solutions. And so as part of that, we kind of don't want to be hiring people who are just like us, or we'll get people who think just like us. So we want people to push the culture just a little bit. We want to have the occasional not quite perfect fit, but we don't want somebody who doesn't fit at all. So note I put down here was quirky, but not difficult. And it's really important to measure what you're doing and be introspective about what you're doing. I mentioned that way back on my culture slide as one of our values is introspection. So we've spent a ton of time doing interviews, and we've spent a ton of time talking about our process. Is this working for us? Are we getting the kind of candidates we said we wanted to get? What are our metrics like? Have we been rejecting too many at the phone screen? Have we been letting too many go at the phone screen, and then we have a super high rejection rate at the face-to-face because all the people we brought in were no good at face-to-face? It's nice occasionally to give somebody a chance when you maybe wouldn't quite want to give them a chance, to help evaluate your process and say, am I evaluating the right things? Or did I bring in this person that I thought was a no and they got in and yeah, it was clearly a no, I'm asking the right questions. Okay. After they have been hired, right? Do they meet their goals? Meet the goals that the company had. Those last 5 candidates that we got in, are they as collaborative as we were hoping? Do we get people who are great at communication? Like, are we happy with the candidates once we've seen them and worked with them for a while? Are we evaluating them well in the interview and making the good call? I mean, it's always hard to do the opposite side. Am I rejecting a person I should have given a chance to? But I can assess, and it's important for me to assess the people that I did give a chance to. Am I happy I gave them that chance? And should I do it again if I have a similar situation? So from my understanding in the UK, it is kind of a common expectation that you'll have a 60 or 90-day evaluation period. In the okay, okay. In my experience, it's been a lot harder to fire a person than to hire them. And yes, and so we do want to try to be careful that we get somebody right. There's definitely cases where we do take a chance on somebody, and we can try to do it. But a lot of my previous career was doing government contracting, and it's almost impossible to get rid of a person unless you make their life even more miserable than it was in the first place because they were doing government contracting. Oh man, we don't see too many of those. No, we don't see too many of those, and I think a lot of those would get a very questionable interpretation on the as we reviewed their resume before we even got them into a phone screen, and then on the phone screen we'd be kind of talking to them, what happened? Like, why are you moving around? Was this a freelance thing where you expected to move a bunch, or is there something not right? On the topic of introspecting on our process, we do like when we get feedback from candidates. We love to hear from candidates. That was the coolest interview I've done in a long time, or ever. Love to hear that kind of thing. So we do, our recruiters do solicit, what did you think about that interview? Not just your performance, but what did you think about the structure and the format of the interview? Absolutely. Absolutely. And just to be clear, I'm speaking about culturally, are they right? Not performance-wise, are they right? But absolutely any kind of discussion about performance and about so there's almost definitely going to be some talk at the engineering management level. Generically, is this candidate everything we hoped that candidate would be? But absolutely, there's going to be a one-on-one conversation between the engineering management and that employee. How are you doing? Is this everything you were hoping for? Are you getting what you needed out of working here? And if there's not, what can we do to fix that? Whether that's it's not because this wasn't a right fit and something's not right, or this wasn't because there's a problem. If you're not getting what you need, if we're not getting what we need from you, what can we do to adjust that? And maybe it's as simple as, this is the wrong project, right? We've got 5, 6, 7 projects going at once, and maybe this isn't the right project. You're not engaged on this project the way that you wanted to be engaged here. So I have a couple takeaways for companies as you're thinking about your hiring process, and I have a couple takeaways for candidates as you're evaluating the company. So as a company, you want to optimize your interview to your culture and the way you work. You want to think carefully about what am I trying to get out of a candidate and how can I optimize my process to try to get those? What questions are going to help me answer the questions that I need to answer to make a decision on this candidate? Unless I really need somebody who's a top-notch computer science to solve top-notch computer science problems, a hard computer science question may not be getting me the answer that I need. So I need to think about what's the thing that I need and how can I ask that question appropriately. And hiring is absolutely important. You just take the time to think about it and do it well. Don't be intellectually lazy when you're thinking about what questions to ask a candidate. Spend your time, think about it. For a candidate, when you're interviewing with a company, think about what that interview is telling you about that company. So if they're asking you a bunch of hard computer science questions, ask them questions about, so what's the work? Are we doing a lot of hard computer science problems? Think about what they're telling you, explicitly and implicitly. And don't tolerate bad interviews. Again, unless the company is really trying to move mountains, don't tolerate them asking you how to move Mount Fuji. So I would be remiss talking about hiring at Tendril if Tendril weren't hiring. So there's our obligatory now hiring slide. We had this in the Denver Post a couple months ago. This kind of shows some of the things I was talking about with, have a marketing strategy and think about how you're trying to appeal to candidates. I've got a few minutes. Looks like 9 minutes. Any other questions?